All right, so I'll go ahead and start. Steve, your hand position looks a little weird. I don't know if you want to be recorded.
I was trying to silence
block the light.
Yeah, I was trying to silence a thing on my computer, and it's always like a mystery how to turn off the sounds.
Oh, you can troubleshoot that later on if you want.
Yeah, no, I figured it out. It's just,
Yeah. All right, I'll do the. Although I don't. Oh, I need the slideshow prep doc because I've forgotten now. I thought I had it all on the slides, but I don't. Sorry, let me just snip out some text. All right. Welcome to Winning Arguments, where you learn to win arguments as a panel analyzes arguments, argument highlights in detail, and suggests ways that everyone can win. Let's see. So today's argument is, Saki says that if you provide misinformation, then you should not just be banned from one platform, you should be banned from others. Tim, what do you think about that?
Well, my first reaction to that was, really? Is that really what they said? Because if nothing else, it's extremely, I'm not sure the right word here. It's blind to what's been going on the other side of the argument in terms of the way this would be taken by people who are already complaining about censorship. So I thought, if nothing else, it was a pretty ham-handed way to be talking about the problem of misinformation.
Steve, what do you think? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, there we go. Hello. I think these kind of statements are pretty attractive because they have a kind of a symmetry that we really like as people. Like, if it happens in one case, it should happen in all cases. But I wonder about that. But I think the major problem with this thing, or the thing that really gets my antenna up, is this idea of misinformation. They even put it in the scare quotes here because they recognize the problem with that. I wonder if there is such a thing as misinformation, and what that would be, and what the difference between being wrong and providing misinformation would be. That's my initial reaction to it.
You mean, is there a difference between misinformation and a lie?
No, just misinformation. Ooh, I was wrong about that.
Or misinformation versus disinformation. Yeah, when I saw this, I think it's, I was thought, well, that's something worth kind of exploring, but not a slam dunk. So that was my initial reaction. Do you want to go a little deeper into that, Tim?
Yeah. I mean, this was a press conference talking about the problem of misinformation online, specifically related to the vaccine and to the COVID outbreak in general. And so it was referring to a problem where actually what they consider to be misinformation has been tracked down to approximately 12 individuals or accounts on Facebook and other platforms. So the point being that there seems to be a nucleus of people responsible for most of the posts that they consider to be misinformation. And I guess part of the comment was, should people be allowed to do this? And, it's up to Facebook or Twitter to choose whether or not to block these users. But so then, why isn't it that there isn't a way to detect who's doing the misinformation and stop them across the board, right? um, I think it was a bit of maybe thinking out loud here, that they should have thought a little more carefully about. I'm not sure, because one of the interesting points is that the people in favor of blocking accounts that seem to be providing misinformation is that it's not a First Amendment issue, right? It's because these are private corporations, they're allowed to platform or deplatform whoever they want. So that's a cover on the side of, okay, it's okay to censor, and yet here it's saying that, and yet there should be consistency across the board, which means it's not an individual decision, which kind of cancels out the First Amendment arguments.
Plus, it was suggested by a government official, even though that, which is interesting. Yeah, I'm surprised she didn't say disinformation. She said misinformation. And I think the overall concept was these kind of 12 high. I mean, I would have just qualified this a little bit more, if you're providing excessive disinformation, and of course that's all subjective. Unfortunately, anything with information is mostly subjective. But I think qualifying that would have made it a little bit more understandable of what's going on, rather than anyone who gives information, if one social media decides to block them, that the idea is everyone. But it also brings up an interesting idea of should there be kind of an external panel to the social media sites and them give recommendations on banning and handling that. And I think some of the social media groups did outsource some of their, I know they'd outsource some fact checking, and they may have even outsourced some bans to a group. So
Well,
it's
yeah,
all, there's a lot of
Facebook-
problems with it, but
Yeah, Facebook, there was a big hubbub earlier this year because Facebook banned Trump's account, blocked it. And they do have an independent panel that was supposed to review their policies and their application of the policies. And in the case of ex-President Trump, they determined that, it was a very weak determination, essentially. The weak determination was that the problem was that Facebook left their treatment, their banning, as undefined, right? It was like, they didn't decide whether or not they were banning him for good or for a determined amount of time. And so they came back and said, well, the problem here is you didn't say how long he's banned for. So there is sort of an independent panel, and I think that the opinion that a lot of people came away with their handling of things was that it's pretty ineffective and weak, I guess. But it's definitely an interesting idea and definitely worth exploring more, I think. And so yeah, that's an interesting part of this discussion. You said that also they should have provided more context. There is a lot more context, right? It's in this one quote. You can't get all the context, and I think in the actual press release there was more context provided.
yeah, and in this case, we're looking at the quote that was pulled by a organization of her speak. So she was in context with what she was saying. I guess I'm saying just more, although I still think, I don't know, actually I need to look up whether she said misinformation or disinformation, because this isn't an exact quote. This is a paraphrase.
I think that's another interesting side to this discussion, our discussion, which is the problem of this kind of debate online, right? Where you're giving a press release, and like I said, there's a lot of context given, and this is in the context of maybe 12 people who are responsible for most of the problem as they see it. None of that is here in the quote, and so essentially she said one phrase that I think was unfortunate, and I don't know their opinion, but probably would have rewritten or retracted. If every single word that she said could be scripted, they probably wouldn't have chosen it, because the way these debates happen online is exactly this. Somebody took the one phrase that is pretty damning from an anti-censorship perspective and excerpted it and is now turned it into a tweet.
Steve, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, this quote's pulled from an exchange, right? So this is a press briefing, and this was a response from a journalist talking about something that was, it's always kind of on the table. But one of the things I think is interesting looking at this is why wouldn't it's kind of funny, why wouldn't the White House say, instead of getting involved in what these companies ban or not, why wouldn't they say we need to provide comprehensive media literacy training to the American people? We need to provide resources for literacy, media literacy, or statistical literacy to the American people. It seems like a funny way if they really wanted to eliminate misinformation. But I feel like, and I think this is kind of obvious to say, governments want a monopoly on misinformation, which they would just call information. Historically, that's what governments do. They're like, no, we're the source of information. It's a monopoly. So it's a little bit of fear here in the fact that they're like, well, we would support these companies curating their content to make profit however they want. And Facebook, Twitter, all these organizations aren't really interested in information. They're interested in clicks, which I guess is a kind of information, right? So they're not going to curate it in the way the government would, but it's not like one of these points of view. Maybe the people that you guys are talking about in terms of the internet debate about censorship, maybe those people would be the people interested in really getting to the truth. But I think this is a battle over who gets the massive share of the market, government or Twitter or Facebook. Who gets to control the misinformation best?
That reminds me of the podcast I just listened to recently, an interview with Eric Weinstein, that maybe we'll look at in another edition of this. But the point he made that I think was pretty well stated is that he was talking about the problems with the CDC and public health policy, and was saying that the position they take is that their goal is to produce the best health outcome as they see it. And so their responsibility is not to the truth, but to making the best argument towards reaching their outcome. In other words, influencing people, even if it's not being truthful about it. And this might be sort of what you're saying about, the struggle of who gets to control the information.
Yeah, maybe we should go back and pull the statements where they said you shouldn't wear masks and talk about how they phrased that and how it impacted them a year later 6 months later when they told us to wear masks.
I could even go, I don't know how long we want the show to be. This might be whacking the hornet's nest, but there might be a case to say misinformation is kind of important, because what it allows, the short version of that, it requires reiteration of particular principles and ideas and policies. So if misinformation enters the public conversation on something like the Delta variant or vaccines or what have you, that misinformation might be an opportunity for someone you might feel compelled to address it. And in that addressing of it, you iterate in a way that then would pick up people that your initial iteration might not have attracted at all, because you were persuading towards a particular. I know from my experience, when I encounter strange tweets, I'm like, why would that person think that? It makes me reword my argument in a way to where people are like, oh, okay, that's what you're saying now. So there might be some value to misinformation. I'm certainly not saying that mimicking a public health department, or the things like the Russian spammers were doing in the 2016 election, mimicking a party or mimicking a state office on Twitter. That's obviously something that should be banned. But putting an opinion out there that's very bad and based on bad information might actually be a resource if we think about it. It might just be the question of whether or not people have the skills or the ability to be able to read that stuff properly. People have a lot of trouble with statistics, even smart people. People who are well educated have a lot of trouble with statistics. So it's a challenge, but maybe there's a good side of it there. I don't know.
Yeah, there's definitely the decision in what you say and how you say it not only takes into account it, you're trying to get a concept into the other person's brain. And there are definitely times where you do have to misrepresent thing. I mean, technically, anything with top secret clearance is a form of misrepresentation, but we don't want everyone building nuclear weapons. So, yeah, it'd be interesting, and I'm sure we'll get into it in future episodes on balancing that and when to do it, and what are the long-term negative consequences of trading for short-term gains. Great. Anyone more? Go ahead.
There's a fantastic Dilbert comic. I'm not a fan of Scott Adams, but I think I am a fan of Dilbert and what he's done with that. And there's a really excellent take on this, which is Dilbert explaining he's giving a presentation to his boss about why they should follow his plan. And he just turns to his boss and he's like, look, the real reason that we should follow my plan, you won't understand and would take too long. So I'm just going to lie to you with some slides here and we'll get to the same result in the end. You wouldn't understand, so let me put it away.
Yep. That is awesome. All right, anything else on this before we move on to responses?
Well, the other side of this, we've been talking about Saki's approach, but what about the tweet itself here, which is the post-millennial, and their handling the actual tweet itself? What is the tweet itself saying, and the way they structured it?
Yeah, they rephrased. It wasn't a direct quote, which she actually had if you did a direct, accurate quote, she kind of had she corrected herself mid-sentence. And we had it pulled up earlier. I should have had it available so we could see what the exact quote is and the difference. But Steve or Tim, do y'all think that this is is this misinformation about a quote about misinformation?
From my perspective, they took out the essence of what was offensive to them, right? They're rewording it the way they heard it and they want people to hear it, which is essentially the government here. They specifically use the word banned, right? They're trying to say the government is trying to censor you here and control the information. And from that perspective, they've done that, I think. It's not the most alarmist way to say things. They let you draw the conclusion. But yeah.
I just brought up the transcripts. If you
Awesome.
want to read the I can read it. I'll try to. This is my
Or
worst.
just give us an impression of what you think, whether it's
Yeah,
accurate.
I can do my really bad Jen Pulaski impression, or I can just read it, and you can make up the quote is she's responding in an exchange with a reporter about whether the government has a position on the kind of stuff that Tim was talking about. So as we all know, Twitter, Facebook, they all have, they're all worried about internet re-regulation or a new wave of internet regulation. So they're trying to get ahead of the curve, right? By providing their own. So they're asking about that. She says, you shouldn't be banned from one platform and not others with you for providing misinformation out there. So I think that the way this was phrased is actually pretty accurate, because it seems like the White House's position is that if one of these companies thinks you're providing misinformation, the ban should carry to all social media. So it looks like what the White House would support is a law that would say that if Twitter decides that your account should be banned for misinformation, then that decision would carry on to over to all social media. Now that feels like the way that they're emphasizing, they put one in all capital letters. It seems like they're very concerned about that. It's kind of concerning because, these panels, if one of them is bad, like Tim was talking about how the Facebook one caused a big brouhaha because of the standards are a little wonky, then why would that be a binding decision on all social media? And it feels like the government telling these media companies, you can't have certain content if you want it out there. So I think they're communicating pretty well their concern by putting one platform you should be banned from all others as kind of maybe too much government oversight. So I feel like it's kind of accurate, but it is definitely an opinion in there. That's their opinion, I would say.
Awesome. Anything else on that? So here's the response. I don't recall who brought this one up. Tim or Steve, do y'all want to talk about that?
I think I put this one in here. I think
All right.
I think it's pretty
Go
good.
for
So
it.
my whole interesting thing here is like, look at how flexible misinformation can be, right? It's wonderful. Misinformation in this case might just be like, a preference. Like, you could easily make a counter argument to this response and say, well, we want as much information as possible so that we can make a good decision in a time of national emergency. We want lots of information. So if misinformation is easy to identify, which it's not, and easy to see at first glance, which it's not, then I think this would be accurate. So there's two parts to this response. One is, we assume the government's going to cast a broad net. That's why they're freaking out. And then the poster says, well, I don't know if they're going to do it or not. But in times of national emergency, we should curtail free speech. Now, this has been done many times before, but the issue with this is who gets to decide when a national emergency is the government, right? So, the birth of the ACLU is the Red Scare, when, the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia caused all kinds of sedition and speech laws. And in World War I, we had Alien and Sedition Acts. And, you say something like sauerkraut, you might be a German spy, right? So they arrest you. So this kind of ridiculous. So the government goes completely crazy at times like that. But I think it's funny because it just shows how hard it is to say what misinformation is, and how it would be easier to do it on the receiving end and just have more comprehensive and available educational tools for media literacy or just rhetorical literacy. Like, how do I evaluate a claim? How do I evaluate evidence? Things that we think that we're pretty good at, but we probably could use more education in. So that was my thought on this one. Is how funny they just kind of whiff it might be a broad net, whatever. But in times of national emergency, I want an absolute empowered government telling me what information is or not. Yeah, it might not be the case. You might not want that.
There are some interesting questions that this brings up too. This goes back to what you were saying also about the Russian misinformation campaigns during the elections, right? That could be seen as a foreign threat, right? It's affecting our democratic process. And there the government took some action against the sources, right? They tried to put sanctions on the perceived misinformers and so on. And what's interesting is, the First Amendment protects U.S. citizens from their right to speech. Online, how do you know who's doing the speech, right? And what if the speech, is the government allowed to censor people on Facebook if they're not on U.S. soil, if they're not U.S. citizens? Those are some interesting legal questions. I'm sure there's an answer. I don't know the answer to that one, but they certainly don't. But, getting back to the question of, you wondered why, Steve, the government doesn't just say, what we should focus on is literacy education and teaching people to read the text better and so on and so forth, which is good, but it's a long-term solution. When you're in the middle of a pandemic, you don't have time for that kind of thing. So it does seem like they're between a rock and a hard place, in the sense that they aren't able to achieve their health goals because of, in an emergency when people are dying, because of an information war, right? And how is the government supposed to react to that? So yeah, this tweet does make that point in the end, although it's, it's not clear, as you said, what is misinformation. So how do you do that?
Let's head to the next one. Dark days indeed. Tim?
Yeah, this is the one I pulled up. This is Tim Pool. We talked about last week too, and maybe at some point I will do a deeper dive on Tim Pool. He doesn't say his opinion. He expects you to know his opinion already, and then goes around commenting and collecting his evidence for his opinions this way. But this one is pretty clear. He is concerned about government censorship, and this is about as clear as you can get that it's happening or threatened. It's going to happen, perhaps.
So when we talk about how effective communication. I don't know, when you're posting something on Twitter, it doesn't seem like a very specific audience. So I find little inscrutable comments where if you're not familiar with the person, and then it has 2,526 retweets. So you can imagine a few people may have seen this retweeted and had no idea what he means by that. So I would mark this as an effectiveness of 1 out of 10. That's my
I like the
response.
scale. That's a good Olympic era scale to be like, I give this a 1.255.
I may be playing the Russians in that. Really tough.
I think that this tweet is not as esoteric as most of his tweets. It's pretty direct, but it requires you to understand certain context, right? I think most American citizens will understand the context, which is that the government is not supposed to be meddling in what people can and can't say and trying to get people banned from social media. So if you understand that context, then what he says seems pretty clear, especially since the tweet that he's quoting is pretty direct itself, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. This is a slightly different tweet. Sakya on deplatforming American citizens, just to kind of quote it for the people listening.
Right.
So
right.
that definitely gives it more context. And a good thing about it as far as rhetoric is it is concise and it is witty. So I probably should give it more like a 4, right?
Yeah, I'd give it a little higher score. Yeah.
I mean, I think you should do what you like. In rhetorical theory, we have we don't just think of audiences as one being, right? There's multiple layers of the audience at once. So we have this theory called second persona theory. So a rhetor, someone who's speaking, addressing an audience like Tim Pool, can be speaking to the audience on Twitter, which would be hard to, like Bentley said, very hard to understand who you're talking to. It's this global audience that's parsed by economic, language, culture, religion, all over. So there's that audience, but then there's also the second persona, which is how does your audience that you want to reach imagine themselves? So traditionally, outside of social media, this would be if you're talking to a bunch of people in rural Missouri, for example, and you start mentioning Thomas Jefferson and Jeffersonian democracy, maybe that audience imagines themselves as directly connected to the Jeffersonian tradition of civil rights and interpretation of freedom. Now that seems like kind of weird, right? I mean, it's a little easier to accept that in the world of social media than it was when Black was writing this theory in the 1970s, where it's kind of like, wow, we do imagine ourselves in these weird relationships across time that people will never meet and constitute ourselves as an audience that can move forward. Maybe Tim Pool is doing a little bit of the second persona kind of work, where he knows he's addressing this impossible to metricize audience, but he also has an audience that imagines themselves as very insider, very edgelord. They're really up on what's really going on in politics. And maybe that's the audience he's trying to, in one movement, constitute and address at the same time. So it might be that going on as well. I mean, there's more to it. You can get many different layers of audience, but he might be talking to 2 audiences at once. The actual Twitter audience and the audience that imagines themselves as defenders of free speech that are aligned with his kind of digital politics, etc.
Any comments on this reply?
I mean, I think this is another one of mine, which I think was great. Who decides what's misinformation? And then the guy provides his examples as 2 things that I think most people would consider to still be misinformation, which I think shows how incredibly difficult it is. And this is also like, again, at the beginning of the podcast, I was saying, what's the difference between being wrong? So I guess there's a difference to address Tim or Bentley. You're talking about disinformation and Tim's talking about lying. There's an intention argument there. But is there a difference between being misinformed and misinformation? Maybe that's the way to think about it. Like, is Big Rick misinformed or is this misinformation? Like, is he willingly attempting to push the line between disinformation, like bad source, even though you vetted it, it's still bad? Or it's good enough for my purposes, so I'm going to run with it, which might be closer to lying. It's kind of an interesting sliding scale we're kind of ad hocing together here.
Yeah, I kind of think that misinformation is a thing, right? It's like a meme. It's the information that gets propagated. So disinformation might be somebody intentionally lying in the beginning, but I think once people pick it up and start passing it on as if it's the correct information, that's maybe when it becomes misinformation, is people wanting to help and inform, but the information they're passing on is not the correct information.
And then is it still misinformation when it's found out to be wrong later on, but it was thought to be accurate by everyone when it was? That's interesting. We'll have to, I just had that thought. That's not a complete thought.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is if it keeps going. Yeah. If it keeps going, it is. Yeah.
I do. So what I like about this tweet is he starts out, who decides what's information? A very clear call, right? And then gives two examples. So like you said, Steve, giving examples, I think, is a really good way to do this. And then, a conclusion statement. So it's here's what I'm going to tell you. Here's why it's true. And then here's what I told you in an even stronger wording. So it's a well-formed tweet. Now, yes, it's interesting using two things that are still in the area of debate. Now, the lab leak theory, a lot of people these days are still saying, oh, well, that's been reversed. We found out it's a lab leak, but they misunderstood. Just a lot of scientists were saying, we don't know, and we want it investigated. And so, of course, that's my read on it. And I haven't looked up recently. And by the time people are watching this, it could be misinformation. But yeah, so that's interesting. And I don't remember enough about but another point to what I thought of when you were saying that, Steve, is that he may also be taking this opportunity to make the assumption that these things that are contested are no longer contested. So he's elevating his opinion at the same time and using this as an I'm not actually claiming that's what he is doing, but that's certainly I think that's one of the rhetorical things that you've mentioned in the past.
I think that's very reasonable. I missed that. That's actually a really good point, because one can elevate. So maybe his claim, if I'm understanding you right, Bentley, about the problems with giving too much centralized power to control expression of information of all kinds, is more dangerous, and maybe elevating by saying, look, these are not necessarily solved, but look at how they've shifted around. And this is actually much more powerful evidence than being solved, that maybe we don't need a central authority on information.
Although I'm also wondering if he's making the assumption that they are solved, so that he's convincing.
Well, that's true.
So other people will remember it, because it turns out for a lot of times people tend to remember what was said most often more than what's most
right. There's a little bit of truth to both of these, apparently. So maybe we should just allow misinformation to run free range information. Maybe that's the phrase we need to copyright.
Yeah, put that on a t-shirt.
While reflecting on this, also, I'm thinking a little more about misinformation, and it seems to me here's another interesting thought, which is that the lab leak theory can be wrong information, but maybe not misinformation. I think perhaps one of the things that qualifies something as misinformation is, if disinformation is about the intention, misinformation seems to be about the effect to some degree, which is, we don't really care about it, or it's not misinformation if it's not impacting public policy or public opinion. And specifically, the lab leak theory at one point was promoted for international political reasons, right? For the blame game sort of thing. If it were just an open question of, oh, how did it happen? And I don't know, scientists seem to think it happened on accident, and there's this other theory, but we don't care. It's the fact that it plays a part in international politics that it elevates it to the level of misinformation in this case.
People who were dying from cigarette smoking before COVID, people were still dying of people were dying of cigarette smoke before COVID. People were still dying.
Some grammar issues here.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to
But-
deduct some points there.
right. Yeah. A whole minus half point for any grammar errors. Are still dying. Although if I had read this beforehand, it'd be easier. People were dying from cigarette smoking before COVID. People are still dying from drug overdoses. Fentanyl coming across our southern border. What are they doing about that? They aren't going door to door, knocking on doors, looking for fentanyl. Who suggested this tweet?
I think I did this one too. I'm the worst offender in this kind of stuff. This is one that's kind of on the line for, isn't this kind of on the line of maybe the snark or something?
It should be the snarkyments, maybe.
Snarky. Yeah, it is a little snarky, but I also think this person is not trying to be snarky. I think they're just upset, right? They're just upset and they're really like, so, I mean, this is a common kind of argument. Like, look, we had this worst death problem. But we've heard all the worst death arguments in COVID, right? There's worse deaths out there. There's all these people dying from things that people aren't, the government isn't addressing. So on one side, we have cigarette smoking, and currently we have fentanyl, and both of these have killed and are killing much more people, but they're not going door to door knocking for fentanyl. Well, I mean, obviously it's not legal, thank God, right? Thank the Constitution, and it's not legal, Fourth Amendment. But at the same time, it's like the argument here, I think is interesting, is that Hartley is saying what is being proposed in the press conference in the press conference is just as intense as if they just went door to door randomly searching houses for fentanyl, is the equivalent kind of civil rights or freedom violation that the ban on one, ban on all legislation suggests. I think they're trying to make a parallel there, and I thought it was kind of interesting, which is why I posted this. It's like trying to imagine what kind of a violation of your rights this social media ban would be.
Yeah, one of my ideas that someday I'm gonna build is a site called Rate My Analogy, which is there's so much argumentation by analogy, and in this case, there's an analogy here that is knocking on door to door is the same as trying to stop misinformation online by deplatforming, right? So let's rate that one as, I find that to be a pretty bad parallel. Not that I see the connection in terms of violation of civil rights, and that's about as far as that goes. But yeah, and then of course this tweet is just a mess for me, so I don't want to analyze any more than that. I give it a 2.
I like Steve. I like how you mentioned it's an emotional appeal, and it's interesting. Two things, like, we're talking about how to communicate, and I think emotional appeals should be part of that, right? It shouldn't be deducted because, it's a dangerous thing, right? You want to be able to have people see into your emotional state at the time that you're making a statement, and sometimes you don't have time to think about it. I do prefer that when you're saying things to make sure they're well thought through and put out there. But it's interesting. I'll have to think more about how I think about. I think it's okay to express your emotions in it. Maybe not do it while you're in the throes of those emotions. Anyways, so that was fascinating, and yeah, it's an interesting analogy for analysis. Yeah, I don't have anything. I just ran out of steam there.
Yeah, Tim, I'll be your first subscriber to your Rate My Analogy. I'll be user number 1. I will pay whatever monthly, because I would waste so much time in that rabbit hole, and I would love every minute of it. That's like so great.
Maybe if we can get a Patreon for that,
let's do it. I'll subscribe. Yeah, I'll be number 1 in line for that Patreon. Just link me when you do it. About emotions, what's funny about emotional appeals, and I think, Bentley, while you ran out of steam there, is it kind of is tough to talk about, because a really good emotional appeal is indistinguishable from a good argument. You're like, that guy's right. He's right. In fact, you even move out of the realm of argument. It can't even be disagreed with. You're like, that is true. Like, we've all had those moments, right? So this makes it very difficult to analyze, because when you see a really good emotional appeal, it doesn't invite to criticism. You're just like, wow, powerful statement, powerful truth there. And that's kind of the environment we're in. I think that this is like kind of this is a worse kind of emotional appeal because it's sort of written in haste, I would say, or just anger at reading a thread and they just got to chime in and they didn't really think about, like you do, Bentley, like, well, I'm publishing this, which I think if you're on Twitter, you should think about, I'm publishing this. This is going to follow you for a while. I mean, this poor guy probably has no idea he's on this podcast right now. He's going to be like, oh, maybe I should have used a period once in a while. But I think that you're right. Emotional states have a long history in rhetoric, and showing people your emotional state has often, the greater part of history, been thought of as a way of getting the audience to also engage in that emotional state. And there's been a lot of weird theories about that over the years, but I think showing that you're passionate about something and being passionate about something is the starting point for most public discourse and argument. Like, why would you engage in public argument if you didn't deeply care? And I think that's like so vital. But of course, we want to avoid ad baculum, appeal to force, appeal to anger, appeal to fear. These are not things that I think any of us would want in our public deliberations. We would want more appeal to reason. Like, what are my reasons for believing this? So one of your reasons could be I'm afraid, but you don't want to like manipulate people into being afraid unless there's really no other option.
For the canonical debate lab, one of the principles that we have in the white paper is that emotions are important, and they're for motivation, and they're for getting you to pay attention and to get involved, right? But reason is for slowing down and making the right decision, right? Emotions and emotional appeals are certainly important, but you don't want to go basing all your decisions on raw emotion. I think there's a real risk here. This tweet shows the risk of trying to make an emotional appeal, which is the goal is to get the other person to feel the same emotion as you, right? You're really appealing to the other person's emotion, not to your emotion. You want the other person to feel what you're feeling. And if you succeed, that's powerful. If you don't, it kind of looks like you're just kind of lying down on the floor, screaming, kicking your legs. The other people have to walk around you, right? It doesn't you lose them too fast.
Yeah, this is probably more of an emotional expression than an emotional appeal, but yeah.
Yeah, what Tim said there, the canonical white paper, reminds me a lot of Daniel Kahneman's work, System 1, System 2 thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's based on that or not, but Daniel Kahneman has a lot to say about our quick brain response and our slow brain response. Right? So it's very interesting.
Let's go ahead into our new segment called Snarkuments. The name may be changing, but we kind of like it.
9.975
on the Snarkuments name. All right. So here's, I don't know who posted this. Tim, was this you or?
This was me, yeah. And I probably could have found a lot better ones. This was just the one that stood out to me. And this isn't actually really an appeal to by humor necessarily. They happen to take in a topic that really got your attention, right? So they're not really making fun of the poster, which is what usual snark is. It would be, a snarky response would be like that. But they are giving an example of what could be harmful misinformation here, right? I don't know if this is misinformation, but anyway, does tanning your testicles increase testosterone production by 350%? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know if that's misinformation, but it certainly got my attention. Of course, the response below is just somebody making a joke. I don't know, Steve, if you want to take on the response to the response or anything. But
I mean, yeah, I'll take a swing at it. I mean, I think that this is like the funny part about trying to create an extreme example. Like, I'm going to try to create an extreme example to show like this is obvious misinformation. But I think that the responder is kind of making a clever joke that almost anything is unidentifiable as misinformation. When we say this is obviously misinformation, people will be like, is that really so? Like, and this is also tied up with things like authority and expertise and stuff. Like, it's hard to know when an expert is making a joke sometimes. just because we're like, oh, well, is that true? And I do this all the time to my students. I'm like, terrible. I'll say some ridiculous thing, and they'll be like, is that true? And I'm like, well, no. And they're like, oh, okay, we didn't think so, but you never know, kind of thing. So I think this is a great response from Bane here. I didn't realize Bane was so funny. I just think of him as trying to kill Batman, but he's got a comedy career here. He's like asking for a friend, which is a great way to say. I think it points out, it's funny because like, oh, I might be interested in that. But it's also funny to say, look at how difficult it is to know what misinformation is or not. Like somebody could easily take this as true. Is it really true? So it's even the most ridiculous statements people will sometimes believe.
Awesome. So any announcements, Steve? You wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean, if you like what I say here, subscribe to my Substack. I put little short podcasts on there myself, and I write a lot on there about different topics, argument, rhetoric, pop culture stuff, politics. So subscribe if you like what you hear here, because there's gonna be more of it there.
Hey Tim, got anything?
I guess if you want me to rate your argument, respond in the thread here, and if we get a ball rolling, maybe we can actually make it happen.
Funding Tim's Kickstarter, what is it, Patreon? Funding Tim's Patreon for Rate My Analogy is like signing the Declaration of Independence.
Very good. I give that a 9.
4.
Oh, 4.
What?
Okay, well, I'll take it. This is a tough crowd. I'll take
9, man. I like that one. Oh, are you talking about accuracy or effectiveness?
That's a great question. Like,
Oh, there's more than one rating, right?
Right. So I give it effectiveness of 7 and accuracy of 0.2.
Very good. I'm not going to get hung by the British if this doesn't work out. So I think
for me, if people want to check out Gullibot, link will be in the doobly-doo, GULLIBOT.com. It's not quite ready yet, but if you want to get on the ground floor and learn more about the project, it's a robot to help reduce misinformation, to help people come to agreement on a society-wide scale. That's great. Well, thanks everyone. This has been a Winning Arguments vidcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. And let us know any debates that you see online or comments or snarky comments that you want us to include in future episodes. Thanks. All right, I'll edit there.
So, yeah, we didn't do an Omni win.
Oh. Well, we could record that.
We could do it now. We could do it now and edit.
Yeah. I'll just edit it in. I missed that on my slide deck, so I was using the slide deck instead of the show prep format.
By the way, do you like how at the very end of the podcast, my host I'm staying with here, he was like, "Why don't you turn on the light?" And turn on the light. And I actually look like a human being.
Can see you now.
I'm just such an idiot. I was just like, "Oh yeah," I was like, "Oh, look at how much better that is." Okay, well, anyway.
Okay, so let's go back to the first one. All right, so how could we improve this? Either the tweet or the phrase that Saki said to be more effective, and maybe in a way that more people and maybe everyone could win. Tim, you want to take a crack at that first?
Yeah, I mean, I think that she should have been a little more self-aware of, the dangers of what she's talking about, which is people seeing that it can be taken as censorship, right? That should have been in the back of her mind the whole time. So instead of saying banned, that's the first word she should have avoided. I would have phrased it that, if it's found that a concentrated group of people are trying to misinform our citizenry, then there really should be a way for all the platforms to work together, something about that, something about sharing information about the misinformation rather than banning across all platforms.
Excellent. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to play with here. I mean, one of the things we have to realize is the press secretary is speaking for the White House. So this is the White House speaking. So this is like, a mass in law and politics and political economy. But I think one thing that might have been better would be to maybe take the foot off the gas a little bit and say it's confusing from the White House's point of view why, if someone's providing misinformation on social media, the social media companies wouldn't work together to make sure they're not doing it on all the platforms. So instead of coming in with this kind of authoritarian, like, this is almost like with the weight of policy, right? Like, we could rephrase this and not lose anything and say the White House would support legislation, president would support legislation. That means a ban on one is a ban on all. Now that sounds like government overreach, tyranny, authoritarianism, all that. But you could punt the ball to the social media companies and say, it doesn't make any sense if one of them bans for misinformation, the other one's permitted. That doesn't seem like a good information environment. It doesn't seem like a good place for the internet in this country, where these companies have so much power. They could have punted it that way too, which I think would have been a really good way to do it, especially in the context of coming internet regulation and new internet regulation bills that are probably going to come up in front of Congress pretty soon.
Excellent points. I would have used the word. Well, first of all, yes, it is the White House. She was speaking off the cuff, answering a question, so I would cut her a little slack. But it is interesting though, when you answer quickly like that, sometimes your subconscious kind of guides. You don't have the time to do system 2. System 1 is the short one, and system 2 is the slow thinking. Not able to do that, so your kind of things that you might not say kind of come out in your internal monologue. But I would have used disinformation, and I really like the idea of saying sharing information and coordinating, and avoiding the word banned probably might have been good. And the other stuff we talking about kind of a due process in the social media organizations is, I think, an interesting idea, to where you ban someone, it's for a set period of time, and then there's a review, have more solid processes, but yeah, not dictated by the government.
When System 2 finally kicks in for the government here, I think there's another even more omni-win for everyone regarding this situation, this problem, which is, maybe instead of talking about deplatforming or banning a couple of users who are causing all the harm, they should they should be talking to the social platforms about what maybe is the real problem, which is, we all believe that more information and the light of day, sunlight, sterilizes and brings out the best information. That's what we believe. That's why we have the First Amendment, right? So how is it on your platforms that 12 people are allowing this information to spread so far without getting properly debated by the experts and the people who are in the know and so on? That's the problem maybe they should be focusing on with these social companies, right?
Yeah, this makes me think that maybe the White House, I think that Pulaski, all these people are probably, she knows exactly what she's permitted to say and what the aim of the, she's in very high level meetings all the time. So she knows exactly what their attitude is. They're just communicating it is hard sometimes because you don't know what the press is going to ask. But I think maybe even if it's impossible, they might not even be interested in a policy like this and know it's impossible to get. But by saying something like this, they actually trick the companies and motivate them into doing certain things they know legislation couldn't do. So they're like, well, we don't want the government involved in what we're doing. It could be that too.
Good point.
Yeah, and also I think just a slight emphasis on excessive disinformation may have been a way to put it, that these are very rare cases where it's just 12 out of how many millions of people are using these apps, right? Or billions in the case of Facebook.
Right, and that takes the focus away from the average citizen here. They're not trying to control the average citizen. There's obviously an outsized problem here of some people who have grown dangerous. I don't know. I'm moving over into the place where people could put themselves, but there is something here where there's maybe only 12 people that are worrying them. It wouldn't be you, average citizen, who's allowed to express your opinion. Now I gotta go. I got a hard stop, and my dog's here.
Yep. See you later, man. All right. So I guess I think we'll chat in the Slack, and I'll try to find some time this week to edit this together. I'll post the unedited
Mhm.
version somewhere. And then I'll see if I can edit it together and how
Okay.
it looks. But yeah, I think
Sounds
it's a
great.
good experiment.
Thanks for hosting and putting it all together as always.
Yeah, and you'd be willing to be the announcer, right?
Sure, yeah, I can do that. I mean,
I
this
think you even
microphone,
offered once before.
obviously. Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I mean, we can just record it once and drop it in as well if you want to. Or I could do it
Oh,
live
that's
every
true.
time. I don't mind. Whatever
Well,
you think. You
the
can play with it in different ways and see what you like. Or what
well,
we
the
like.
bit about the bit about introducing each person and kind of running the
Sure.
host duties. I just think it might
Sure.
be good to rotate that.
Yeah, I
Although
can do that.
when
I
we
also
first
like
said
your
that,
idea about producers. I did that on my podcast for a while, and it worked really
Yeah.
well until people got real jobs. Then they were like, couldn't do it anymore, and then it was all me again, and then my podcast kind of fell apart. But that was a good way of being like, I'm in charge of the production of this episode. So they're like messaging people and saying, "This is what we're gonna do. Find your tweets. Here's the document." So
yeah,
I like your idea of that a lot too. I think that might work pretty well. I just got to find good tweets. Tim finds all the good stuff. So I gotta find better stuff.
he's got a good sense for it.
Yeah.
Well, because he has to take in his side project, he has to take those arguments and put them into a debate graph. So he's very practiced.
Right. He's doing it all the time. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'm happy to do whatever you think would be good.
Yeah.
So, happy to do it.
Awesome, man. Are you going to be still traveling next week? Or you gonna be back home?
No, I should. Well, actually, that's a good question. I'm either gonna miss it. I'll put it in Slack. I'm either gonna miss it because I'll be on a plane, or I'll be back and just very like
tired,
a wide awake because I'm getting very used to West Coast time out here. I've been out here a week already, so and I've got another week to go. So I think I'm gonna go back on Monday, but it could be Tuesday. So I'll just let you know in Slack if I'm gonna be available.
Yeah, no pressure. I mean, this is a volunteer thing, and the great thing about doing a panel is that if someone's gone, it's not like the show is over. Like I don't know where Adriel is today.
Yeah, maybe he forgot, or maybe he just overslept. Or
he may have,
and deadline.
He may have had an emergency.
I know
because he's trying to work
like a deadline. There's some big deadline to have something delivered.
This is during his lunch, so if something moves around.
So okay, yeah, maybe an important meeting with somebody ran over, which is fine.
Yeah. All right, man. Talk to you
cool.
later.
All right. Take it easy. Bye-bye.